My fiancé yelled, "You're nothing without me." I said, "We'll see." Then I quit my job, started a business, and cut all contact. A year later, she showed up at my office crying in front of my wife. I, 32 never thought the woman I was going to marry would become the reason I'd rebuild my entire life from scratch. We'd been together for 4 years when it happened. The engagement ring had been on her finger for 8 months. Wedding plans were in motion, and I thought I had everything figured out. I was working as a senior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm, pulling in decent money, but nothing extraordinary. She worked in marketing at a larger company, made slightly more than me, and never let me forget it. The cracks had been showing for months, but I'd been too invested to see them clearly. She'd make comments about my career trajectory, how I wasn't ambitious enough, how her colleagues' partners were doing better things. I brushed it off as stress from wedding planning. Looking back, I was an idiot. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working on a side project for months, a specialized software solution for small businesses that I truly believed had potential. I'd poured my evenings and weekends into it, teaching myself additional coding skills, talking to potential clients, mapping out a business plan. That night, I finally worked up the courage to tell her I was thinking about leaving my job to pursue it full-time. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She didn't just express concern or suggest caution. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but a genuine, mocking laugh that cut straight through me. She told me I was delusional if I thought I could make it as an entrepreneur. She said I didn't have the intelligence, the drive, or the network to pull off something like that. When I tried to explain my research and planning, she cut me off. That's when she said it. The words that changed everything. She told me I was nothing without her. That her income and her connections were the only things keeping me relevant. That I should be grateful she was willing to marry someone as mediocre as me. She yelled that if I quit my stable job for some fantasy, she'd leave me, and I'd end up alone and broke, proving her right about how worthless I really was. I stood there in our shared apartment, feeling something inside me shift. It wasn't anger exactly. It was clarity. I saw our entire relationship replay and fast forward. All the subtle put-downs I'd normalized. All the times she'd diminished my ideas. All the moments I'd made myself smaller to fit into her vision of what I should be. I told her we were done. She didn't believe me at first. She thought I was being dramatic, that I'd cool off and apologize. When I took the ring off the counter where she'd thrown it during her rant and pocketed it, her expression changed. She started backtracking, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just stressed. But I was already mentally gone. I moved out that weekend, crashing with a friend while I figured things out. The next Monday, I walked into my boss's office and gave my notice. He was surprised but understanding, and we agreed on a 2-week transition period. My ex called and texted constantly, alternating between apologizing and telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I blocked her number after 3 days. Those first few months were brutal. I'd saved about $40,000 over the years, and I knew that was my runway. I rented a tiny studio apartment, bought used furniture, and cut every unnecessary expense. My days started at 5 in the morning and ended near midnight. I refined my software, cold called potential clients, attended every networking event I could find, and learned more about business operations than I'd ever thought possible. The loneliness hit hard sometimes. I'd spent 4 years building a life with someone, and suddenly I was eating dinner alone every night, falling asleep to silence. But every time I felt myself weakening, I'd remember that look on her face when she called me nothing. It fueled me in ways I didn't know were possible. My first client came 2 months in, a small accounting firm that needed customized workflow management. The contract wasn't huge, but it validated everything. I delivered beyond their expectations, and they referred me to 2 other businesses. By month 4, I had 6 clients and hired my first contractor to help with development. By month 6, I was breaking even. Around that time, I met someone new. She was a freelance graphic designer I'd hired for some branding work, and we connected over coffee to discuss the project. There was something different about her from the start. She asked questions about my vision, got genuinely excited about the technical aspects, and treated me like an equal. We started meeting for coffee even after the project wrapped, and slowly, carefully, I let myself open up again. She knew about my ex, knew about the harsh words that had pushed me to take this leap. She never pitted me for it. Instead, she told me that anyone who couldn't see my potential wasn't worth my past, let alone my future. 6 months into knowing her, I realized I was falling in love in a way that felt completely different from before. This felt like partnership, like mutual respect, like someone seeing me for who I actually was. By the end of that first year, my business had 15 regular clients, 3 full-time employees, and revenue that had surpassed what I'd made at my old job. I proposed to my girlfriend on the anniversary of starting the company, and she said yes without hesitation. We got married 3 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Nothing elaborate, nothing showy, just genuine and right. I'd almost completely forgotten about my ex. I didn't check her social media, didn't ask mutual friends about her, didn't think about her except in passing when someone asked about my motivation for starting the business. She'd become a character in a story I'd moved past. Then, on a random Thursday afternoon about 13 months after I'd walked out of our apartment, my assistant buzzed me. She sounded confused when she said there was someone in the lobby insisting she needed to see me, refusing to leave. She wouldn't give her name, but said it was personal and urgent. I had a feeling I knew who it was before I walked out there. And I was right. She was standing near the reception desk, looking smaller than I remembered. Her eyes were red, makeup smudged, and when she saw me, she started crying. She said my name like a question, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. My assistant looked at me with raised eyebrows, clearly ready to call security if I gave the word. I kept my voice level and asked what she was doing here. She started talking rapidly, words tumbling over each other. She told me she'd made a mistake, that she'd been horrible to me, that she'd spent the last year regretting everything. She said she'd heard through mutual contacts that I'd started a company, and she'd looked into it, seen that I was doing well. She said she'd been miserable, that her career wasn't fulfilling, that she'd realized what she'd lost. Then she saw my wedding ring. Her eyes locked on it, and she actually gasped. She asked if I was married, and when I confirmed I was, she broke down further. She said she'd come here hoping to fix things, to prove she'd changed, to show me she believed in me now. My ex stared at my wife, then back at me, and something crumbled in her expression. She started talking about how she'd supported me, how she'd been there for years, how I owed her a conversation at least. My wife didn't say anything, just reached over and took my hand. I told my ex very clearly that she hadn't supported me. She'd torn me down, made me doubt myself, and told me I was worthless. I told her that the worst thing she ever did was actually the best thing that happened to me, because it forced me to see what I was capable of without someone constantly diminishing me. I thanked her for that, genuinely, because without that moment of clarity, I might have settled for a life that made me miserable. I told her I held no anger toward her anymore, but there was nothing here for her. No reconciliation, no closure beyond this conversation, no place in my life. I wished her well and asked her to leave and not come back. She tried once more, reaching out as if to touch my arm, asking if we could just talk privately. My wife stepped slightly forward, not aggressively, but enough to make her presence clear. She told my ex that I'd already said everything that needed saying, and it was time to respect that. My ex looked between us, seemed to finally understand this wasn't going to go the way she'd hoped, and walked toward the exit. At the door, she turned back and said she was sorry, that she hoped I knew she never meant those things she said. I didn't respond. She left, and I watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away. My assistant asked if I was okay, and I realized I actually was. There was no vindication, no triumphant feeling, just a quiet confirmation that I'd made the right choice. My wife asked if I needed a minute, and I told her no, I was ready for lunch. We went to that investor meeting, and it went well. We secured funding for an expansion I'd been planning. On the drive home that evening, my wife asked me if seeing my ex had stirred up anything unexpected. I thought about it honestly and told her no. That person, that version of me who'd tolerated being made to feel small, didn't exist anymore. The man I'd become was because of decisions I'd made after walking away from her, and I was grateful every day for that growth. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the trajectory of the past year. How I'd gone from standing in an apartment being told I was nothing to building something I was genuinely proud of, finding a partner who made me better, and creating a life that felt authentically mine. I thought about how pain, when channeled correctly, could become the most powerful motivator. I never heard from my ex again after that day. I heard through the mutual friend network that she'd moved to a different city a few months later, started fresh somewhere else. I hoped she found whatever she was looking for, but I didn't spend much time thinking about it. Update 1. It's been 3 months since my ex showed up at the office, and I'm writing this because some things happened that I think close this chapter completely. Last week, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It was her. She'd clearly created a new email since I'd blocked her old one. The message was long, apologetic, and surprisingly self-aware. She wrote about going to therapy, about recognizing patterns in how she'd treated people, about understanding that her insecurity about her own career had made her cruel to mine. She acknowledged that she'd been emotionally abusive, using that specific term, and said she wasn't reaching out for forgiveness or reconciliation, but simply to take accountability. She wrote that seeing me happy, successful, and moved on had been the wake-up call she'd needed to actually do the work on herself. She said she understood if I never responded, and she wouldn't contact me again regardless. She ended it by saying she was genuinely happy for me and sorry for the pain she'd caused. I showed the email to my wife. She read it carefully and asked what I wanted to do. I thought about it for a day, then wrote a brief response. I thanked her for the apology, told her I appreciated her taking accountability, and confirmed that I'd moved forward completely. I wished her genuine success in her healing and growth. I kept it short and kind but final. She wrote back a simple thank you and goodbye. I didn't block the email address, but I didn't save it either. I archived the thread and let it fade into digital history. The same week, something else happened that felt like the universe confirming I was exactly where I needed to be. My company landed its biggest contract yet, a partnership with a regional chain that would nearly double our revenue. The negotiation process had been ongoing for months, and when we finally signed, I felt this profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with building something meaningful. My wife and I celebrated by taking a long weekend trip, something we'd been putting off because of how busy work had been. We hiked, talked about future plans, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped defining my success by escaping my past and started defining it by building my future. I'm writing this final update because I want anyone reading who's been told they're not enough to know this. The person who makes you feel small is wrong. Not just wrong about you, but wrong about how value and potential work. You don't need someone's approval to be worthy of success. You don't need to prove anything to anyone except yourself. Walking away from my ex was the hardest and best decision I made. Starting over was terrifying and empowering. Building a life with someone who actually sees me has been the most rewarding experience I could imagine. The revenge wasn't in her seeing me succeed. The revenge was in me discovering I never needed her validation in the first place. I don't think I'll write about this again. This chapter is closed, and honestly, the current chapters of my life are so much more interesting. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.